some of the links between the grassroots movements and the trade union movement were problematic, and that's what I want to focus on a bit. But just to stay with the positive story, there were lots of practical projects around, in Denmark particularly. We get used to the idea of large wind turbines having come from big companies, but they didn't. The first few wind turbines were developed by grassroots organisations in Denmark. On a wing and a prayer, the school, the Tvind school, which is sort of A-level college, built this, still one of the largest wind turbines ever, the Tvind machine, 2 megawatts. If anyone knows anything about wind turbines, we're just about doing that now, 30, 40 years later, just themselves, a bunch of 18-year-old school kids put together this large wind turbine in Denmark. Denmark also gave us the Smiling Sun anti-nuclear slogans. There was a lot of things going on at the grassroots. But it wasn't all just about energy. It was also just about every aspect of technology was up for grabs and was debated. But as I say, there were some divisions of opinion about how we should go forward. The grassroots alternativist tradition was small scale, community orientated, slightly different in tone to the traditional trade union view, which was about large factories and working class communities. That sort of came to a head when, for example, there was one of the first big alternative technology conferences was actually at UCL. I went to it, and someone stood up and said, "We're talking all this politics. I came here to talk about wind turbines, not about politics," and stormed out. Right? And it's called Hugh Sharman, in case you're interested. When the Lucas plan finally emerged, the Lucas shop stewards, who I'd got to know by that time quite well, were saying things like I've quoted there. They're saying, "We're not so sure about all these alternative products." Oh, and I'm on the wrong page here.
Can I just say, I think we're watching something you've just
said. Yeah. The first big college at UCL, as I say. So when the Lucas stewards had a look at the what was emerging from the alternative technology movement to see if they could include any of it in the plan, they thought, well, no, actually, a lot of it wasn't really relevant at all. It seems to be sort of gimmicks, little things that would make sense to middle-class people in their posh houses, but not relevant to working-class people in high-rises in Coventry. This is not what we're interested in. So there was a bit of a polarisation. The Lucas workers didn't actually think much of the political strategy that was implicit in the alternative technology movement, which at that time was mainly about going off to Wales, if you happen to be in Britain, or New England, if you happen to be in America, and setting up communes and having reasonably difficult time, but at least playing out your ideas at the small scale in isolated communities. They say, well, we don't have this option in Birmingham or Sheffield or Glasgow. We have to deal with where we are, with the situation we're in. So there was a political polarisation. The Lucas plan was very much to do with technologies that were relevant to the communities that the shop stewards' families were in. So that's where they were based and grounded. They managed to do some prototypes, as we've discussed already today. Some of the academics around, including myself, got involved with that and helped the shop stewards develop actual prototypes. The road rail bus is the most visible one. But there was another one which I got involved with, which at the Open University, which is a heat pump. Now, it's a nice issue here. This heat pumps are very much the coming thing now, 40 years on. Just in case you don't understand, a heat pump's a bit like a refrigerator working in reverse. A refrigerator, you plug into the electricity, it cools the inside of a box, and if you go around the back of a fridge, there's little veins pumping out heat. Well, you can turn the whole thing around, put the refrigerator sucking cold from outside and pumping the heat into your house. So that's what a heat pump is. It's a device for using electricity to pump heat into a house. So the electric heat pump was just about around in the 1970s, but the Lucas stewards said, no, we don't want those. We want something completely different. We want a gas-fired heat pump. Gas is an unusual thing to use to run a fridge. If you actually caravans. Some caravans have gas-fired fridges, so there's some technical advantages in using gas rather than electricity. So one of the issues is that they tend to be larger. The economies of scale being the device happens to be big. So the Lucas stewards came up with a large gas heat pump, which the OU built. There's a picture there. You see, it's large. It's not the sort of thing you put under the kitchen sink. They took it to the management, and the management were sort of interested. There was a possibility of an R&D budget fund for the OU in Burnley, this was, to work together on it, but it all fell apart and it wasn't followed up. But it gives a nice example of the difference in their approach. They were going for larger scale technology, suitable for a whole housing estate rather than just an individual house. Whereas now we've got a government pushing electric heat pumps, and the story about that, the reason why our very nice government we all love so much wants electricity run heat pumps, because they're desperate to find some use for all the electricity they're going to have from Hinkley nuclear power plant. Because after 6 o'clock peak demand, what the hell is it going to use all this electricity for? I know, electric heating. And you won't believe this, the government's plan was, but I think they're backpedaling on it, but to get rid of all the gas heating in your houses, and strip out your gas boilers. Literally every single gas central heating boiler is going to be stripped out. Instead of delivering heat energy on the gas main, it's going to come on an electricity cable from Hinkley. Well, I'm not saying the shop stewards in 1970 understood all these issues, but they turned out to have been right. That was the government's current plan is suicidal and not going to happen. The gas-fired heat pumps are a much better idea if you're going to do that. For example, rather than stripping out the gas boiler and just forgetting about the gas grid, you'd stay as you are. You've already got the gas grid and you've got the boiler. You just use slightly different technology for heating. So maybe by accident, but I think more by their view of how technologies should be linked into use, the shop stewards sort of automatically found the right sort of technologies. So the principles that they developed in the plan are probably more important than the actual products. So we're saying this community base and their experience of naturally operating within those communities and knowing their particular skills sort of all work together in a positive reinforcing way. And that's probably the lesson we take from Lucas, not so much the individual products, because but very few of them went any further. But gas heat pumps are now widely used, not that widely. The Open University's got a large one, for example. We run most of the OU's heating system in the new OU hub, if you happen to go there, is a gas-fired, a large 150 kilowatt gas-fired heat pump. So Lucas' stories did go full circle in a way. Lucas wasn't the only one, of course. There are lots of other plans. I worry that we keep talking about Lucas. I was involved with shop stewards groups all over the country trying to do similar things. There was a sort of copycat exercise. Every group of shop stewards worth their salt. Oh, we wanted an alternative plan for our company too. Some of it a little bit embarrassing. I actually came across one alternative plan. I think it was Clark Chapman, the company in Newcastle that no longer exists, so I can't, it's fair enough to say, which is actually the Lucas plan with the word Lucas snowpaked out and Clark Chapman written in. Into the more or less identical copycat plan. But some of them were original. The Vickers in Barrow, the shop stewards at Vickers who were building submarines at that time, thought, well, wave energy was the logical technological link with the marine technology they knew about as they produced a Chrysler in Birmingham, which was still around in those days, looked at electric vehicles. So it's worth remembering that there were more than just Lucas. Where are we now? The same issues are still on the agenda. They're just as urgent, if not more urgent. We need sustainable energy technologies, we need sustainable jobs. The UK has been very slow at developing sustainable energy, and you may be seduced by the government's rhetoric that we're really pushing ahead. And if you listen to the anti-wind people and think the country's been plastered with wind turbines and it's shameful what's been done. We are the worst country in Europe, bar Luxembourg and Malta, in terms of developing renewables. We're actually behind everybody else, so there's plenty of headroom to fill. UK actually has a tremendous potential if we'd have the pressure from underneath to push it. I think the pressure from above is not there, so the pressure from beneath has to come. Now, we have some problems. In the 70s, the anti-nuclear movement in Britain was quite strong. Now it's fairly weak, and that's a problem. And one of the weaknesses is that the trade union movement, who people like myself had spent a long time winning the trade union movement to an anti-civil nuclear position, and we actually did. We got the TUC voting actually anti-nuclear, quite apart from the Labour Party voted very strongly for, this is Kinnock says, yeah, we are now anti-nuclear, non-nuclear of all sorts, that's it. All of this is gone. Same with the trade union movement. We've got the G&M these days talking about, oh, jobs and nuclear, fantastic, we'll have it all. This is a real problem we have to deal with. There isn't the connection there to be able to do that at the moment. As I say, the Greens and trade unions have some common interests, but the nuclear issue is the one that's going to divide them, and I suggest that it's worth spending a bit of time on that, because otherwise, if we don't resolve this issue, it's going to come back and keep biting us. It's a big issue. The UK, of course, has got huge potential if you want to sell the alternatives for renewables. Offshore wind is the biggest option in physical resource terms. If you look at a map here, that map of UK there shows where you'd put all the offshore wind farms. That red line around the outside is the UK's territorial waters. If you look at the little dotted line close to the country, which Elizabeth Windsor owns, so that the crowned bit, but there's enough space to treble the size of Britain effectively. So we're talking about a very Great Britain. If you really want to taking back control and building a Great Britain, what we have is a gigantic potential for a much larger Britain, with offshore wind being our major option for the future. In other countries, there are bitter battles going on to defend what has already been achieved, like in Germany, which is well ahead in just about every case. The government is still backsliding every chance it gets. There have been bitter fights over the funding for photovoltaics, PV solar, and there's some wonderful demonstrations with people marching with PV cells and police sort of beating people on the head with holding PV arrays. It's a very different world we live in these days. The campaigning for defending renewables against governments' changes of mind is something we also need to maintain. And of course there's the grassroots movement itself, which has, within the renewable world, has actually expanded quite dramatically. Not so much in the UK again, but across Germany, something like 40% of the project's capacity of renewables in Germany is now locally owned by local farmers groups, cooperatives and residents. The industry, the electricity supply industry, has now lost control. We've actually, at a point, we've actually seized control of a market. Not complete control, but the industry has lost control of its consumers. They're often generating power themselves. It's an appalling situation. Now, it's not the same as controlling the means of manufacturing the technology. It's only controlling the market, and there's a big difference in that. Corbyn wants to do the same thing in this country, and good luck to him. I hope it happens. There are a few local wind and PV co-ops in Britain, but not that many compared with Germany and Denmark and the rest. Finish off. Grassroots initiatives are obviously where you can make some input. They're seed beds for broader change. You still need national and global campaigns. The 1 million climate jobs campaign is a good example of what is being done, and I've been involved with that personally. Actual campaigning, as we all know, is the only way to actually get on top of anything. You learn so much from it. You involve yourself in consciousness raising, you build organisations, all those sort of good things. And the trade union and labour movement knows about this. It's been doing this for hundreds of years. We need not to forget that there are people who already been through this and know how to do organising. I sometimes worry that grassroots community groups seem to be trying to reinvent the wheel again. There's so much experience already in the labour and trade union movement organisations around the world. They need to be brought back in, or we need to connect up with each other much more. Whether workers' plans can fit into that, I don't know. I hope so. I can see workers' plans being a useful focus for campaigning. I could see there being a way to build links between trade union and community groups, because the nature of the plan is about linking consumers in communities and producers in the same communities, there is potential for building useful links there. I wouldn't want to stress workers' plans as a magic solution. You know, someone emailed me the other day, said, can you write a workers' plan for Trident, please? What, me? You know, oh, I'll just sit down and write a plan. Out Trident, do the following things, post it off, that's it, press the button, resolved. Well, that's missing the whole point. It's not a technical fix, even if you've got a clever academic or even a dumb one like me to write a sort of plan. That's not really what you want. It's the process that matters. It's building up to being able to write a plan, being able to see some campaign potential around it. The content of the plan, to some extent, is not that important. It is important, obviously, but it's the process that's important. So I'll finish there and see how this matches up to your experience.